Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Courageous Choice. I'm really honored today. We're joined by Susan Kelliher. She is a transformational leader known for her ability to drive strategic change while fostering a culture of growth, resilience, and inclusivity. With deep experience guiding global companies, Susan has successfully led large scale organizational shifts, built high performing executive teams, and championed sustainable business growth both organically and through large scale M&A. I was personally impressed when we met a few weeks ago, just at her deep knowledge, her passion for developing courage and strength in HR leaders as well as other leaders, and the experience that she's had doing this across organizations. Thanks so much for joining us today, Susan.
Yeah, I was really honored, so thank you for having me. It's
Yeah,
great how a
yeah,
chance meeting can turn into something.
it's so true. We, yeah, and then we in our prep calls, I was like, oh, we could talk forever. This is amazing.
Then we discovered we were neighbors basically, so
Yeah, exactly. I walked over to your house, but, you weren't there. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so obviously we're talking about the courageous choice, but from a context perspective, you've been doing a lot of work, um, helping lead organizations, and now you're coaching, right, leaders and HR professionals. Maybe share a little bit about kind of what you're focused on today professionally.
yeah. So I had been an HR professional and led organizations and been part of executive teams for so long. And so when I finished up as a chief HR officer, I really I wanted to be able to help organizations from a different perspective. And so really most of what I do now is board work. So I sit on the board of a large family-owned business and it's an infrastructure manufacturer called EJ. And then I also I'm on the board of the National Safety Council, which is really my heart. It's the nation's oldest and really one of the largest safety associations in the world, famous for many things like child safety seats, and we're instrumental in seat belts and all kinds of things. So I spend a lot of my time in the boardroom now working with executives and coaching and supporting them from that perspective. It's been really rewarding.
That's incredible. When you made that shift, I know a lot of executives look to make that shift into the boardroom from the C-suite. What were some things that you noticed as you changed hats?
Well, so sitting in the executive chair with management for so many years, I had, in some cases, just been frustrated that I felt like board members weren't forthcoming with feedback, um, often just didn't say things that needed to be said in the room. And if those dialogues did happen, it was the board member really pushing an agenda versus being genuinely interested in management's perspective and also context for the situation and for the decisions that they were making. So it's been really great to be on this side of the table and be able to check in with management and say, hey, is are the questions I'm asking helping you? I often in discussions with the CHROs of the companies with whom I'm involved, I say, look, your management, we expect you to come to us with the problems that you're having, where you need assistance, and what your solutions are so that we can give you the alternative frame or have some constructive discourse on it.
It's so interesting, those powerful questions, but without an agenda. I think that's really valuable for organizations. Um, and yet sometimes those dynamics kind of get mixed, either, lack of clarity in kind of lanes or just not enough information or, kind of skewed information really on either side of we've seen those dynamics. But that sounds like a healthy board dynamic, which is fantastic. They're lucky to have you. Um, we talked a little bit about courage from a functional perspective, and I think it's true in any leadership role. Leadership courage and the ability to speak up is important. But one of the things that you and I talked about was that it doesn't always look the same.
Mm.
So when you think about courage and kind of how it shows up, what do you think about?
Well, I think courage starts with knowing where your feet are planted, having your own personal values and ethics. We talk a lot as HR professionals about people finding places to work where their values align. So, first, knowing where your feet are planted is kind of the starting point for courage. The second point, and I think about this a lot in the situations that I run into where people will say to me, "Wow, that was really courageous." It seemed really natural to me, because when I think about courage, I I think the risk is worth it to do the right thing, and so am a little surprised sometimes when people say, "Wow, that was really courageous," as if it's a surprise. Um, in in everything we do in life, what I hope I personally demonstrate is that I know where my feet are planted, I know what right is, and I'm comfortable moving forward with what I think is right, and I'm willing to accept consequences to that as well, which are real, particularly in the business world.
You have shared some stories, and I was hoping that you might share some today around, maybe an example or 2 where you did stand up and step into that courageous place.
Yeah. So, yes, and courage shows up kind of in those quiet spaces that people rarely know about, and in the very visible ones where they do. I'll talk first about one where it was really pretty visible. So, as the chief people officer of a company responsible for putting together benefits programs, we were doing that in the midst of a lot of changes. So, look, without getting political, there were changes to laws around women's health care. There's a lot in the media about trans rights. And in the midst of all that, we were getting a lot of sensing from employees. So we would hear from employees to say, "Hey, what's going to happen to me? What are you, the company, going to do for me?" So we made some choices about benefits programs, one of which was to institute a travel benefit. Um, and essentially, what that allows is if the care that you need isn't available within a 100-mile radius, you can get travel reimbursed. The benefit of that, setting aside particular, however you feel about women's health, that benefit serves everyone, particularly for a company where we had a lot of people in rural areas where care might be really far. So for me, it was a no-brainer. So that sets the stage. It was a decision we made. It was widely supported. Our employees were delighted. And my CEO was so proud of it, he wanted to share it with the board. It wouldn't be something we would typically need to share with the board because it's a management decision. It wouldn't have elevated itself to the boardroom. Not that I'm worried at all about being transparent with the board. However, women's health highly politicized, and I respect that people have differing views. I don't need to put my view out there. I just needed, as a CHRO, to try to put together the best benefits package I could for the variety of employees working for the company. We have one board member that had very strong opinion about that to the negative. And in the boardroom, it became a fight, not amongst all of us. It was mano a mano, his perspective and me. And and in that moment, I felt fine. So I'll say that I never felt for a moment um, that worry about being at risk or what might happen or what the consequence would be. And I go back to where I started with. I know where my feet are. I know why I made the decisions that I made. And I also knew that it had tremendous support across the company and within the management team. So I felt really confident demonstrating courage, kind of standing up in that moment and explaining what we were doing, explaining what I shared at the beginning, that this is a benefit that can impact so many employees. It's not just about one type of care for women. But it was rough. And what made it particularly difficult is in a room where dominated by board members, with myself and the CEO as management in that room, I was the only person that was having that conversation with that board member. So that was one of the things I've reflected upon it many times. I feel again completely confident in how I handled it. I also it felt respectful of the individual. I knew that, like, what he was doing was in his heart. So I couldn't, there's no reason to be angry about it. But look, I mean, board members have a lot of power over people. So there's no question that there's some risk involved in having that discussion. But that one in particular really stands out at me.
Yeah, you were the leader representing, a decision that had you obviously had been part of that decision, but the organization and the C-suite team or the leadership team as a whole had made a decision, and you were the spokesperson. And I've been in a situation where you kind of feel like, wait, where did everyone go? I'm still standing here. Um, and we talk both kind of functionally.
Yeah.
Sometimes HR leaders, maybe wouldn't feel empowered enough to stand in that decision, might feel like they had to, play smaller or, just
Mm.
not have the confidence potentially, or may not even be in the room sometimes, in
Yeah.
the board meetings, right? And then also just sometimes the male-female kind of ratio
Mm.
too, either in the C-suite or boardrooms can be off as well. So I think that, just that example of kind of standing up, willing to stand up, it's really part of what being a leader is, right? Being able to
Mm.
explain a decision, explain the logic behind a decision, and you know, and if we're wrong, would make a different decision. But in that case, it was really just about explaining a decision.
Mhm.
Um, when you think about kind of leading in today's world, um, and I know that you help organizations not only on the boards that you assist, but I believe you coach leaders, and assist in lots of different ways. When you think about that, what what skills or competencies do you think are really important for leaders today?
Well, so one I'll say is the ability to just step back and listen. I actually think that's probably more than anything a leader could bring, because when you get to a leadership role, right, you built a book of business of you have a encyclopedia of knowledge that you've developed over time. So you come in feeling, I think, in large part really confident about that. So I think one of the things that really distinguishes great leaders is that they they listen really well and are open-minded, not only to listen, but to hear it and to be comfortable and confident enough that what they're hearing may change their mind, that it may overwhelm everything they've learned over 20 years, that it could be such an important piece of information. And I think that can be really hard for leaders sometimes because people are looking up to you. So, listening, you sometimes lose that skill. So to me, that is fundamental. And in fact, I can talk about a great CEO I worked with, and that is the thing that I reflect most on about him and what I would remind myself to emulate. Because look, we all get in the midst of like, hey, I've got something important to say. I've got the right idea. I know where we wanna go. And to step back and say, "You know what? Let me hear from everyone around me. Where are they coming from? How do they see this issue? What are the ideas that they bring to solve it? And do I have to make this decision? Or can I just give it to somebody else because I'm confident in them, and I wanna demonstrate that." So, I think the ability to listen, to hear it, and then to either change or let someone else take the wheel is a really important thing in leaders, and it builds great leaders, which is kind of fundamental job of anybody in a leadership role. If you are leading a group, you have a responsibility to everyone in them to make them great. And I really believe that. So I think that is a one.
I believe that too, and I think that, at some point in our career as leaders, that's where we make that shift into exponential impact.
Mm.
We kind of a lot of us rise because we have the answers or we figure things out or we, are driving solutions. And then it's the switch of listening and, connecting dots and asking the right questions. Then that exponential impact comes through helping others be more effective at leading, and building their confidence. And then you can see that kind of ripple effect across organizations. I
Mhm.
love that you brought up the idea that what courage can look like is not always what we might anticipate. It isn't always being out in front.
Mhm.
Um, it's often that subtle courage was a word that you had
Mm.
used previously, just around, subtleness and how things are being received. I think sometimes, we talk a lot about being authentic selves. I had a guest speaker in my USC class one time. A student had asked, we talk about how do you bring your authentic self, um, and still stay professional? And this was a CHRO, and she said, to Wanda Storm, she says, well, when did bringing your authentic self to work mean like being in your PJs? Isn't it about bringing your best professional, authentic self? And I just thought that hit home, right? Like, let's not be confused here. Um, but it's the same with courage. Courage doesn't mean um, not caring about how you're received, right? Like when there's some nuances that I know you think about in regards
Mhm.
to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that courage shows up really well when it's very personal and very quiet and maybe isn't out in front what everyone sees, but the things you do behind the scenes that really make a difference. So one of the things I think about, I give you an example is as a CHRO leading the management team in their discussions around succession and development. And in one particular session that it it didn't mean that much to me until someone else brought it to my attention. So you're talking about individuals, like what are their capabilities? Where are the areas where they need to improve? We use coded language sometimes to talk about people. Right? This is no surprise. We've been talking about bias for a long time, and it never goes away. You just need to know it's there and respond to it. So, sure enough, in this discussion, one of the leaders was talking about a an emerging female executive, and as his way of describing her was, "Well, she'll cut ya." And as not only was she female, she was also Black, and that really ghetto way of referring to her just struck me as wrong, and and I also knew that he didn't mean it that way, right? I mean, he was so in that moment, I had to say something. That's courage, to just say, "Hey, look, let's try that again because I don't think that's the way that you wanna talk about her. What do you really wanna say? Like, what are the characteristics of how she does her work? How does she lead others? What has shown up where she's not being as effective as she needs to be, or she's running over people in a way that may compromise her or compromise the mission? So get people to rethink and and once you say it, I would tell you 99.5% of the time people are, "Well, thanks for letting me know." They can immediately readjust, and they're willing to do that. And I talk about that being courage and quiet moments because, you get a different reaction if you wanna do that in front of a big room full of people and make something of it. It's it's still courageous, but it may not be effectively courageous. So that was one example where just in a quiet moment to be able to do that with a small group of people and it impacted not only that person, but everybody in that room to reshape how we talk about people.
Yeah, like you weren't trying to make a big statement or put him in his place. It was really more about having an effective conversation that could lead to constructive, development for that leader that you were looking at that could help her round out her edges, which we all have, right, in an effective way. And I think there's something very powerful just about stopping, that like if you just move forward assuming that he didn't mean the way maybe it sounded or something, um, what that says in the room is that that kind of talk is acceptable, and then over time, that becomes, part of the culture, and so that leadership to step in and just kind of like, "Oh, we're not gonna talk ab that's not how what are you really trying to say?" Or just however you said it, it sounds like you did it beautifully, but the it just stops it doesn't gloss over, I guess, and I think that the today we're looking for that. We're looking for real leaders who are, intentional, perhaps, about both conversation, things that are said, not said, our actions, right? People are watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the vehicles that we used at that company to help build that capability for everyone so that we all got used to giving the alternate frame or calling something out in a positive way is that you actually pass that responsibility on. So as an HR professional, right, there is often an expectation that you keep the culture, that you're responsible for people's behavior or for addressing it. And it couldn't be more wrong. We all have a responsibility. We're all in this together. And so, one of the vehicles I think worked really, really well is to assign that role to somebody else in the room and to pass it around because that just knowing that your responsibility is to give the alternate frame, to be the culture cop, really helps everyone to elevate their game and get better at that. So, my example of courage then is easily replicated because someone else is going to get to try it out themselves.
Yeah. And it normalizes having, diverse perspectives, countering views,
Yeah.
which is going to lead to better decisions, right? If you're thinking through, even if everyone was in agreement, if somebody's does like, we used to do it in like debate where you have to come up with like the opposing view. If I had to
Mm,
come up with an alternative viewpoint, what would it be? And it just forces you to either be more confident in a decision you're making or perhaps consider things you wouldn't have otherwise.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that it's always I think everyone really comes into it with good intentions, and that's one of the other things I think about being courageous that's always important to think about. I reflect on it myself. I don't go into situations where there's a need to be courageous. There's some risk of blowback or danger, real danger, whatever that may be, um, with the idea that the bad thing is going to happen. I actually go into all of those situations with the idea that something good happens because you did it.
Yeah. Because you did it. The One of the things that has been coming up just in the workforce today is just around anxiety and different comfort levels, and I think about fear, right? If something's gonna prevent someone from potentially doing something they perceive as courageous, that there might be a fear or something that is preventing them. Um, as you're either developing leaders or thinking about it for yourself, what helps you overcome that either potential fear, or what advice would you have for someone who might be feeling that?
Yeah. So I'm a natural risk taker. So some element of lack of fear, whether that's misplaced or not, probably comes up. Maybe that's a starting point. However, I'll go back to what I said that I think whenever you're faced with something that's uncomfortable, anxiety producing, perceived or actual risk, um, stepping back for a second and saying, if I do this, what good thing will happen? Yeah. How will I be better? How will the situation be better? So even starting the frame with, you know, it's not even what's the worst that can happen, right? That shifts to the negative, right? So it's not going in to a situation with the idea that something bad can or will happen. It's going into that situation going, when I do this, when I demonstrate courage, when I say the uncomfortable thing, when I step in front of someone who is at risk, the good thing that's going to happen is that they'll be safe, that it will have been a teachable moment, that we as an organization will have progressed, that the person that I spoke to will be better. I think that makes courage easy, right? When you think about the good things that courage can do, at an individual level, at a team level, at a company level, at a macro level, how it makes us better, then I think that reduces, shouldn't ever take it away, but reduces that level of anxiety.
Yeah, it's like a muscle that you just
Yeah.
build, and I always point to, like, my tummy area because that's where I feel it, but, you do it anyway, right? And sometimes it's excitement, sometimes I don't know, you have lots of different feelings, but you do it anyway. I'm gonna ask you to think back for a second. When you think back as you were growing in your own career,
Mhm.
there are probably points where you stepped into that stand-up mode, that fearlessness, or braveness that maybe you remember. Is there one you'd wanna share with us?
So so I actually got to write about this in a book that's coming out that Ian Ziskin, who's a mutual friend, is put together, and it was about people from your past that who passed away and how much they meant to you. So my moment of courage, and I'm not even sure that I was as courageous as I was, didn't know any better because I was about 25. So it was my very first job in human resources. It was with Mobil Oil, and I for a lot of different reasons ended up being the HR business partner for a really senior person in mobile, way beyond what my capabilities or what I rated. Um, and and while he was a salty guy, um, I mean, he was a lifelong smoker. He was he'd grown up in the oil fields. He was a hard person, and he was also used to getting yes. Being at his level, everything he'd done, he wasn't in the business of asking. He wasn't necessarily in the business of listening all the time. He was in the business of, I know the answer. I'm going to tell you what I want you to do, and I want you to do it. And that was particularly true in human resources because, like, we weren't very far from personnel at that point. We were just kind of emerging maybe to something beyond the group that got your paychecks done. And so he wanted to do some pretty outrageous pay increases for people on his team. And I remember sitting in his office and I was ready with data. I had a really good mentor who like talked me through. We looked at the data and like what you should and shouldn't do and what was a good idea and what was a bad idea. And so I go in, I'm feeling knowledgeable, like I'm the expert here. And we sat down and we started going over it. And he just wasn't having it. And and I wasn't mature enough as a HR professional yet to realize that I probably should have stopped, so can carry on I did. I was like, "Let me tell you again why this is a terrible idea, and let me tell you what it's gonna do down the line and why this is bad," and all of a sudden, like, he slammed his fist so hard on that table, like, the whole table jumped. Um, I'm gonna tell you, at the end, he made the call, and that is one of the things I've definitely learned, like, at the end, like, if you own that budget or if you own that company, that is your decision, and I'm gonna do everything I can to help you make what I think are good decisions. I'm gonna arm you with data, but you get to make it, and so he did, but I always remember that as a seminal event of, like, how, like, everything in your stomach, like, just churns, like, "This is bad." And the nice thing is, like, I can't tell you what that man meant to me. Like, trial by fire, bruised me up plenty of times, like, made me work for every win that I got, um, and really built in me, 1, an ability to construct a solid argument and use data, and 2, to feel really confident being courageous in conversations.
My guess is that he also had much more respect for you after that situation than he might have had you just kinda kowtowed to without any fight, I think, or without data and an informed position, is my guess.
I think it always makes a difference, and I think so many of my formative experiences with leaders were with the ones that really exercised my abilities and really scared me. I was my mentor who I just adore to this day, who's made me, I think, so much of what I am. I he called me up to his office one night at about 6 p.m. and I thought, well, this is it. I'm getting fired. And I was getting an equity award, like, for a special like, something I did, but, I mean, that's the and so I know that in this more evolved age, we care we should care about how people feel, and we shouldn't try to create anxiety. Um, I will say, kind of like training your muscles, right? It probably should hurt a little or it can't get stronger. And that's what I will tell you, or so much about my formative years growing up in the human resources profession, working with leaders and working for leaders, and And sometimes it hurts, sometimes it is scary, sometimes you think you're gonna get fired, sometimes you may. That certainly happened to me, and it builds in you a muscle to carry on, and from where I started from, know where your feet are planted, and be okay with that.
I love that. Is there any advice that you have for leaders who wanna have an impact or maybe are trying to figure that out for themselves where their feet are planted?
Yeah. Well, reflecting, personally on why you do the things you do, what really matters to you, what what are you willing to do for the thing that matters, right? Where's that limit beyond which you're not comfortable going, and then push that envelope. Right? Do take the job that's over your head. Apply
Yes.
for the thing you don't totally know about. Go into the discussion with someone who's intimidating, armed with facts, and be ready to, like, go to the mat with it. Like, test yourself. I think that's really important, and put yourself in all those uncomfortable positions. So, knowing where you stand, making those uncomfortable those taking those uncomfortable stances, and you get better at it. I mean, by the time you're old and salty, like I am, then, it seems much easier. Like, it seems a lot easier to me now from where I sit to to say to say what's on my mind, to challenge something that's uncomfortable, to step in the path of something that could be bad. The story I share with you, I still think about, jumping out of a car because I saw a woman attacking another woman, like grabbing her by the hair. And it's on the streets of Philadelphia. For people that have been to Philly, maybe that might happen every day. And just twisting. And making the decision, like, I can't watch that happen and do nothing. I gotta do something. So, in heels, and it was a nice dress, like, I jumped out of the car and interceded. Knowing where your feet are and knowing where your right is, what your true north is, I think gives you a lot of confidence to take those steps and act in a courageous way.
Thank you so much, Susan. You are truly an example of one of those stand-ups that we talked about, someone who will stand up. I love the examples. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing all your stories. And I hope that I get to see you here in our hometown when you're in town, and
Look forward.
maybe I'll do this again.
Maybe we will. Thank you so much, truly, Jamie. I was really honored to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to The Courageous Choice. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review to help get the word out about the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future conversations. If you'd like to know more about gig talent, please visit gigtalentagency.com or email us at podcast@gigtalentagency.com. See you in the next episode.